Hello and welcome to UC Trends. My name's David Dungay. We are back to dissect the trends of 2024. Today I'm joined by Garth Landers, Director of Global Product Marketing at Theta Lake. Welcome to the show, Garth. How are you?
Great, very good. How are you today?
I'm fantastic, thank you. So, Garth, we are fresh off the back of your UC award win, where you took home the best compliance product category. Congratulations on that. I'm really interested to get into this conversation today. We're going to be talking about hybrid work, but particularly how people can use that compliance sort of to their advantage to get the most out of their hybrid work situation. But Garth, before we get into that conversation, do you want to give us a bit of an introduction to yourself and Theta Lake?
Yes, thank you very much. So, as you mentioned, I'm responsible for product marketing here at Theta Lake. I've spent the last 20 years or so, both as a vendor and industry analyst at Gartner, discussing compliance technology related issues, um, spanning and working with a number of global organizations. And currently at Theta Lake, where we support some of the world's leading financial institutions and help organizations use the technologies we'll talk about today across unified communications and collaboration safely, effectively, helping them unleash the productivity and capabilities that are inherent in those platforms while also remaining compliant with regulatory requirements and governance policies.
Great. So let's get straight into the conversation today. Let's do a little bit of a scene setter. What do you see as the major compliance challenges today? That are really associated with that hybrid workplace that we're all grappling with right now.
Yeah, so the last 2 years have been filled with lots of high visibility headlines. You don't have to be in the industry to recognize them, right? I think, if you look at the general business trade press and see what's been happening over the last 24 months, numerous financial institutions have had fines levied against them for a couple of key issues. One would be record keeping, and they have an obligation to really capture and preserve the context and fidelity associated with the communications that they're having across their organizations and with their customers and trading partners. That could be quite difficult because they have to, as mentioned previously, preserve that context, that fidelity. If there are things like emojis embedded in a conversation, those are part of those sort of electronic communications that need to be kept for record keeping purposes. There's a lot of volume and velocity and different types of records that are happening today. Everything from, things that span electronic communications in chat and, all of the embedded elements that are in our virtual meeting platforms today, like, Q&A and polling and in-meeting chat. There's audio communications, all of the different ways we're using voice over IP and transitioning to, these platforms today are collaboration platforms to have, audio and video discussions. Then, of course, there's all of those elements of video too that, that are increasingly being looked at and considered. The second challenge that organizations have really been facing is, again, lots of fines and levies, and you hear the term the technology WhatsApp a lot, right? And that falls under sort of the umbrella of unmonitored communications. And organizations, you know, they've empowered their workers, they're giving them capabilities. In some cases, they're restricting capabilities, right? Because there's a lot of fear and challenge around compliance obligations. Organizations have responded by restricting features, restricting some of the aforementioned features we talked about: in meeting chat, file sharing, screen sharing. And what's happening as a result is that many users are rebelling, right? There's a saying that water finds a way. Simply by taking something away, users will respond. If they want to and need to communicate with their customers, their clients, their trading partners, they're going to do it. And what's been happening is they've been, drifting towards those unmonitored communications, the ones that are not sanctioned by their employer, and subsequently have been found out, sort of identified. In some cases, lots of high-profile dismissals, personal fines, happening there. So that unmonitored communications, along with record keeping, are two of the biggest. Now, there's a couple of more, and I'll go quickly here, but they're really important. It's been almost 4 years, right, since we've really started globally to adopt unified communications and collaboration. The pandemic accelerated that, obviously, and I think organizations are still culturally and behaviorally challenged. The safety and usage of these tools, right? It just becomes very rapid fire the way we adopt them. And so things like screen sharing, having browser tabs open, you know, um, doing those things, conducting a meeting without having a password, without having a waiting room, those types of safety and usage issues, there's a lot to do there. Now, the last challenge is that, organizations have not been sitting still. And the idea of record keeping, of, capture of communications is not new. And so, organizations have invested before in solutions like email archiving, and they've tried to apply and leverage those email archive systems to fit today's current, UCC platforms. And there's a lot of challenges there. Everything from an inability to preserve and protect the fidelity and context of those electronic communications. A chat is not an email, a video meeting like we're having today is not an email. And so they lose that context, that fidelity. They miss capturing records. Users change context, right? Users might start a conversation on video, go to just audio only, and then just leverage chat. They may change platforms. Obviously, email archive systems cannot keep up with that. So those are some of the challenges that organizations are grappling with today.
Yeah, there's a lot for organisations to get their heads around with these challenges. I do want to go back to some of the things you said earlier on in your first answer there. I think the phrase was "water will find a way." Employees will find a way to communicate, whether you like it or not, in a lot of ways. But how can businesses, really strike that balance though, where they're giving that accessibility, the access to data, but still maintaining that compliance and hopefully abating some of that fear you mentioned earlier as well.
Yeah, so we've conducted some research around this topic. We recently came out with a survey of 600 individuals in financial services, spanning both unified communications, IT stakeholders and leaders, and compliance personnel. So we found a lot going on there, and the restriction type, responding by taking away capabilities, that obviously, even though that's on the rise, right, and organizations continue to do more of that, it presents and produces more of the types of behavior you don't want to do. So clearly, that's not working. So what does work? Well, it's a real balancing act, and you really still need to give the users what they want. In many cases, what you've already paid for, right, in terms of licensing and adopting unified communication. So you need to give them the capabilities and the features that they want. And there's a reason for that. One is to, stop having the types of unmonitored communications occur so that they don't sort of rebel and go off platform. The second reason is you want them to live, really live and work in their UC platforms, in their Zoom meetings, in their Microsoft Teams, in Cisco WebEx, in RingCentral, and really do all of their best work and all of their work there. A lot of the behavior that's taking place is not that all of your users are engaged in malfeasance and your workers are nefarious and doing bad things. many of them are doing, the wrong behavior for the right reasons. Again, they want to communicate, they want to drive and produce revenue. And so if they can't do that, if you're not giving them the tools, they're going to do those wrong things by going off platform. So you want to give them the platform to work on, make sure that they're doing the right things, and have them basically live in that platform, so that when it comes to the malfeasance and the bad behavior, you can go after those rogue users and really identify the people engaging in wrongdoing, which is typically a very, very small percentage of your workforce. On the other side, you've got to recognize and understand the needs of the compliance team, right? Why do they want to? They don't want to necessarily say no. You're putting them in a difficult position, but they see the volume and velocity of these communications, and they're afraid we're not going to be able to keep up. We've got sort of legacy investments, older technology platforms that can't really preserve the context and fidelity. They can't really surface the risk that's occurring, that's occurring in all of these multi-threaded, multi-platform communications, and they're frightened, right? They're saying, I only have to be wrong once as a compliance person to have our firm end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times. So you have to understand their needs, and you have to give them the capabilities to really be successful. They need to find ways to leverage things like machine learning and natural language processing that'll help them automate some of this risk detection, so that they're not behind the wrong side in terms of trying to keep up with the aforementioned volume and velocity of communications.
Well, let's talk about AI. I mean, 2023 has been really the year of generative AI, particularly. I don't imagine there've been many compliance teams that have necessarily welcomed that. There's some really scary statistics around the usage of these ChatGPT and Bard and those kind of tools in the enterprise level, which are not monitored. But I mean, what are you seeing at this level? What kind of risks is AI presenting businesses right now, and either from a risk point of view or maybe even a mitigation point of view? There are some AI tools out there as well that work the other way. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so great question. It's in the last year, right? Everyone knows the adoption of generative AI type tools has just exploded in today's organizations, and regulated organizations are no different, right? We're really like leveraging unified communication platforms, trying to enhance and increase productivity, and there's no doubt that generative AI can help us do that, right? Help us automate, in many cases, a lot of the sort of routine, sometimes grunt work that happens. We see firms sometimes looking at those chats that they're having with their customers, with their clients, and looking at the chat from a UC platform and saying, "Wow, how can I take the contents of that chat, of that meeting that we had, and summarize it and basically put together a proposal, a proposal with terms and conditions and boilerplate and an agreement and all of those things. And can generative AI help me do that?" Well, there's no doubt in use cases like that and many more, generative AI is going to be great. Of course, the challenges become a few things, right? There's the whole issue of authenticity and what's my work versus what's authentic versus what is generative AI. And following closely behind that really is, you know, like the things that we talked about in terms of cultural and behavioral issues, this is all new ground, right? So you have to really guard against potentially sloppy or error-filled work, right? We've also seen everyone, is aware of kind of the things that we're seeing with generative AI in terms of errors and so-called hallucinations and things like that. So the last thing you want to do as an organization is to have that sort of error-filled, sloppy, work that reflects poorly upon your institution, breaks down trust, which when we're talking about regulated organizations, trust is enormous. So you don't want to have that as an ingredient. Obviously, on the risk mitigation side, we just talked about, you know, providing tools like, machine learning and natural language processing and the ability to really automate and identify risk and do that across, you know, different platforms, different modes of communication, across voice, across chat, across video and screen sharing, and across whiteboards. An enormous task. A human can't really keep up with that volume and velocity of data. So you do need to leverage AI, as we'll call it, and those subsequent technologies to, keep pace, be precise, be accurate. You don't want to just scoop everything up. You want to be laser focused and make sure that you're identifying the right conversations and be able to summarize, right? Summarization is something that we're seeing a lot in unified communications that's been, enormously helpful, in meetings where, you have those summaries of meetings. It's really enhanced productivity.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about some of the risks and some of those mitigation that companies can use. If you could kind of summarize, what's really essential for businesses to be, what should they be thinking about right now from a sort of a core compliance point of view, to really just secure that hybrid workplace effectively. Let's leave our audience with a little bit of some key points there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it can seem like a lot, right? And at Theta Lake, one of the things we do really well is help organizations, identify those new modes of communication and take them on sequentially so that, you can adopt new forms of communication, you can capture them, you can retain them, and you can identify risk. But that really leads to the first point, right? As an institution, you need to ensure that new modes of communication, such as in-meeting chat, are captured. Whiteboards, great example. New mode of communication. Is there a duty to preserve communications in a whiteboard? It turns out, increasingly there is. And so you want to adopt that. You want to be productive, but you've got to make sure that those are being recorded, those are being captured, those are being retained. At the same time, you need to be selective, right? If we're having a, a virtual meeting, you may not have a requirement or a need to go through that entire video conversation to identify risk, but you do want to, selectively capture elements of the meeting, such as private and group chat, polling, you know, meeting whiteboards again. You need to be able to find records of communication. So when there is a governance event, whether it's audit, compliance audit, whether it's an internal investigation, whether it's discovery, you need to be able to go through this large volume and again, selectively identify and retrieve, particular communications and preserve them in context so that you can identify that risk. Um, you need to be able to really look at everything that goes into modern communication. So, there's a lot going on there. So, considerations to make. Are we considering things like GIFs, reactions, emojis, embedded files, um, you know, cross platform conversations, consideration, meshing, right? When you think about um, using a platform like a Slack, for example, there may be an embedded meeting element like Zoom. So now you've got, as a compliance team, you've got considerations to make within that chat. How do we capture the embedded link to a virtual meeting that took place as well? This is quite a list, and I recognize that it's lengthy, but these are all just considerations. Not everything you have to do all at once. Reconciliation, understanding that as you capture records, you're keeping a record of sort of the metadata of you know content that's coming out of a platform like a Zoom or a Microsoft Teams or a Cisco WebEx, and keeping, sort of that metadata or record of where it's going. Is it going to a third party archive? Where are you storing it? And once it's there, records about, where it is, that you can retrieve it, and of course all of the data around preservation and retention policy. So, reconciliation is something that organizations need to think about. Now, those are largely technical things. There's a lot that goes into policies. We talked today about virtual meeting policy safety, and thinking about configurations. And what often happens with these UCC platforms that we're all engaging in and leveraging today is that you have a set of policies regarding passwords, authentication, waiting rooms, outside participants. What are your policies around that? And over time, because we're all working in a very decentralized, distributed, virtual workforce, their policy drift takes place. So you start to lose the effectiveness and core safety principles around having a virtual meeting. So you need to monitor and look at those policies over time. That's something Theta Lake helps with, of course, as well. And then thinking about policies as a whole, I think organizations really need to communicate to users the rules of the road. What's acceptable? What's not acceptable? What are sanctioned platforms that we're providing to you, the end user, and what are the ramifications if you do go off channel, if you do go off platform? 2022, 2023, and certainly 2024 will have had examples, and we'll have more examples of end user transgressions, malfeasance, and subsequently not only organizational fines, but in some cases, personal responsibility. So you need to outline what that looks like, and you need to keep people engaged, reminded, and constantly trained as well, especially as we're starting to adopt more and more new technologies.
Fantastic. So, Garth, obviously, we're looking into 2024 right now. What are the big things at the front of your mind when it comes to opportunities or maybe increased challenges
I think I
in the
lost you.
compliance sector?
Yeah, so when we look at 2024, big challenges and opportunities for compliance. We've talked about regulated users and organizations today. We certainly expect that unified communications compliance will expand outside of regulated users and organizations, because it's just the way that we work. It's the fabric and the foundation for how the virtual workplace, the hybrid workplace is conducted today. You're going to see more general enforcement and more governance from organizations around usage, and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, looking into violations of policy. We've seen this already with organizations related to conduct, behavioral conduct, things like hate speech, racism, sexism, employment disputes. These are all records, these virtual conversations that we're having. So organizations outside of regulated industries will consider more policy enforcement actions and technologies that will help them do that. The other thing we expect to see will be that unified communications will continue to cross-pollinate. Today we talked about meshing and embedded conversations, right? When we're using a chat, there may be a link to a third-party, meeting platform for video. From a compliance standpoint, that can be tricky. Your conversation is jumping platforms, jumping modalities. Organizations will be challenged then from looking at a chat record and looking at that conversation, which also can take place over many days, weeks, months, even a year. And then where they go to in a virtual meeting platform there, where they switch to audio and video and in meeting chat. So if you're a compliance team, that can seem formidable. So we expect that unified communications will continue to cross platform pollinate. You'll see more of those alliances. Or providers will look to more of those alliances and cross-platform capabilities, especially as organizations start to make decisions about standardization, and the platforms themselves will say, "This is an area that I want to focus in and be the best of breed in delivering a particular unified communications modality, for example, or tool or capability." So those are the things we expect to see a lot of in 2024, in addition to um, all of the points we had earlier about artificial intelligence and authenticity and providing authentic and accurate work in the virtual workplace.
Well, Garth, I think that's a really great place to end today's discussion. I'd just like to say thank you so much for coming along and joining me.
Thank you. And thank you very much for giving Theta Lake the Best in Compliance Award this year. We are flattered and honored to receive it.
Great. So, and thank you for watching. You've been watching me, David Dungate, on UC Trends. If you want to follow the rest of this series, you can do so on social media by using the UC Trends 24 hashtag. That's it from me. I'll see you next time.